So it might seem pretty obvious to say that we are animals, but I think it's actually something that we don't fully understand. And the reason I say that is because with certain behaviors and problems that we see in society, or just problems in general, we're very quick to assign cultural explanations for why those things exist. But we don't ever really consider biological or evolutionary explanations for why these human behaviors exist. And I think a big part of that is that we don't really see ourselves as natural beings. Like, we don't really see humans as a part of nature. But the wild thing is that countless human behaviors are also seen in animal societies and especially mammal societies. I think it's pretty obvious that genetics encode for physical appearance. It's why we look more similar to family members than we do to strangers. And since all of us shared, the majority of our DNA, it's the reason why we all have two eyes, two ears, a nose, that sort of thing. But we never really think about how behavior works in the same way. Like, it wouldn't make sense for genetics to only encode for physical appearance. So we're more likely to behave more similarly to our family members. And in general, there are certain universal behaviors that humans share. And so a fascinating question is like really thinking about like what are these general behavioral characteristics that humans have. And I think this stuff is super important to think about because while a good amount of behavior is culturally driven, it's the reason why cultures can be so different from one another. There is a significant amount of behavior that does have evolutionary origin. Like, regardless of the time period you're looking at, regardless of the particular culture, you're going to see that behavior. Um, and I think being able to make that distinction about whether a behavior is cultural or if it has evolutionary origin is critical if you're going to try to suppress certain behaviors in society. For example, if you want to reduce how much war and crime is in the world, you have to consider the fact that men are genetically predisposed towards being violent and territorial. And you have to think about ways about how to suppress that by looking at, animal models, by studying animal societies. And really, that shouldn't be that surprising. I mean, you see that in just about every human culture that behavior is present. And you see it in basically every mammal society. Um, but the point is that there are going to be some biological behaviors that we have that we'll want to suppress because it makes modern society worse. And then there's other behaviors that we have that we'll want to highlight in order to make, life better for everyone. But I think really thinking about these things in a deep way and having it affect decision making and lawmaking is really when we'll reach a point where we realize that humans are animals. So I want to touch on some of the common themes that you see throughout mammal societies, and unsurprisingly, you see them in human society too. And one of them is an us versus them mindset. So this kind of encompasses things like tribalism, xenophobia, ethnocentrism. And really, at the core of this framework is that you have a notion of your people and you have a notion of other people. And the way that you perceive your people doing things is right and true, and the way you see other people doing things is wrong. You have less empathy towards them, and you see them as more deserving of hate. And some of the main evolutionary drivers for this behavior is that one, by creating an external threat, you actually reduce internal conflict. And you also reduce sexual competition with those who are less genetically related to you. And so the evolutionary driver there is like kind of clear. It works as a unifying force and it also reduces genetic drift. But what's really fascinating about it is that what is perceived as the other is completely dependent on the culture and the generation. Like, it's a very dynamic framework. Like, the way that the youth is imprinted on completely changes what the other is perceived as. And so the notion of a race or a different tribe can be completely different generation to generation. Another theme is that males tend to be very violent and aggressive. And really the evolutionary function there is that with fighting, basically you space out the population a bit and avoid overcrowding and sexual competition. Males also tend to be very territorial and compete for dominance. And something that's really interesting with that is that there's this thing known as homosexual metaphors, where after a male defeats another male, he'll use sexual references as a way of demoralizing the other male. So a way that's commonly done is that they'll mount the body of the male they defeat. But to me, a perfect example of like how humans do this is with language. So like with phrases like "fuck you" and "suck my dick," those are very clearly like sexual references, and so to me, very clearly tied to the homosexual metaphors that we see throughout the animal kingdom. Males tend to be sexually eager, and females tend to be sexually eager too, but more specifically towards high status males and males that have been pre-approved towards or by other females. And this actually ties into another common theme throughout mammal societies, which is the dominant hierarchy. And sort of the evolutionary advantage there is social stability. So leadership and leaders are able to instill a sense of safety for the population by refereeing disputes, calming individuals down, and overall just providing a sense of stability. And there's also rituals in which individuals can rise in rank with things like combat. And with rising in rank, their mating pool basically opens up. More individuals are sexually available to them and that sort of thing. There are trade-offs to the evolutionary mechanism. There's trade-offs to like basically every evolutionary mechanism, but the trade-offs here is that individuals can be more anxious about where they fall in the society, concerned about their ability to rise, insulting the wrong individual. Also, leadership can abuse their power, and in those situations, usually they're undermined. A very interesting trend is that during child rearing, mothers are very nurturing, whereas fathers are largely absent. The young are pretty much raised by single mothers. There are some exceptions to this, to some degree chimps, gorillas, and wild dogs. Humans are the clearest exception because humans, we obviously have pair bonding and dual parenthood. But I don't think it's a coincidence that in these particular species you see longer childhoods when the father sticks around, and longer childhoods are actually connected to more complex brains. Now, a really interesting question is what is making it so that the father sticks around, and it's actually the sexual availability of the mother. For most mammals, the mother is not sexually available during incubation, but in the species where the father sticks around, she is sexually available all of the time and very committed to the male as well. And so there's sort of this, there's a clear evolutionary driver on both ends where on the male side, now he's assured that, the children are in fact his own and he can now ensure their survival. Whereas previously he had no way of knowing that the children were even his. And so there's very clear evolutionary advantages to pair bonding and dual parenthood versus, detached sex where the father is also not around. So yeah, I think thinking about all of these things, it's really important to recognize that there's far more patterns of behavior between us and animals than we realize, and that to really fully understand human nature, we're going to have to think about these things on a really deep level. Like if we really want to suppress the worst parts of human nature, we have to think about these things. And I think that if we do, we can shape society in a way we've never been able to do before. But yeah, I think there's so much fascinating discussion that can branch from here, even on subjects like free will, for example. But yeah, I think in another video, I really want to focus on chimpanzees and their society in particular, just because there's an insane number of similarities there. But yeah, appreciate you for tuning in. If you enjoy, leave me a like, subscribe, and yeah, until next time, peace.